Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, thanks so much for stopping by. We're really excited to have you. If you want to, you can click the little subscribe button down below and the little notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. Only if you want to. If you're returning, thank you so much for coming back, and I'm really sorry that I've been gone for as long as I have been. I struggle with depression pretty severely. I don't know, these last couple of weeks have just been extremely difficult for me, so I just decided to take a little bit of a break. I know you all will understand and be very, very gracious of me, so thank you so much for that. But I am excited to be back. I'm very excited about what the story I'm talking about today. I decided to, since it's Halloween, we're going to do more of a paranormal or spooky kind of video. We're going to be talking about a famous haunted house, and so I'm going to do a real deep dive into this. I did it over on my TikTok. It wasn't a deep dive, but we did talk about the story a little bit over there, but I decided to go deeper into the story here on YouTube, and so I'm really excited to talk about it. And if that's something you'd enjoy, I have talked about it before in the past, but I thought about adding maybe another day in the week where I do more of a paranormal story, so we wouldn't just be talking about true crime or paranormal or conspiracy theory or anything like that. So if that's something you'd be interested in, maybe after the Halloween season, I can kind of revamp my channel and maybe add something like that. Let me know what you think down in the comments. But today we're going to be talking about the real story about the haunting in Connecticut. Oh, and also, we are having like this crazy windstorm outside. It is just insane. So if you hear wind, I waited all day long to be able to record and not hear any wind outside, but it's just not stopping. So I figured we'd just go ahead and do it. I'm really sorry if that's distracting. I'm hoping the music will drown it out. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about The Haunting in Connecticut. This movie was terrifying to me, but I also loved it. I love anything like horror or paranormal. My favorite kind of movies are thrillers. Have you guys seen this movie? I really liked it. Yeah, so we'll go into the real story of The Haunting in Connecticut. This story is set in the 1980s when the Snedecker family moved into a house in Southington, Connecticut. This story is mostly focused on Carmen Reed and her significant other, Alan Snedecker. Carmen and Alan had 4 children together. Their oldest was Philip. Philip was diagnosed with terminal cancer at a very young age. I believe he was about 13 or 14 years old when he was given this diagnosis. Doctors did not believe that he was going to survive this cancer. And Carmen and Alan were really willing to do anything they could for their son. They really wanted to help him and they wanted to see him survive this cancer. They lived in upstate New York when he was diagnosed, and they found a hospital in Connecticut that was willing to do some kind of new procedures to help him. So they had like some clinical studies or something that they got their son into, and they were trying to help him beat his cancer. But in order to get to this hospital, Carmen and Philip had to drive about 4 hours one way. So it was 8 hours a day that they were commuting back and forth for these clinical trials. And it was a everyday process. Every single day they had to travel from upstate New York to Connecticut. This was extremely taxing, not only financially on the family, but also on Philip, who was weak and really sick at this point. So in order to combat this, they decided that maybe moving to Connecticut closer to Philip's hospital would be the best idea for them financially and for Philip. Carmen started looking for apartments. Now it's important to remember that this is a pretty big family. They had 4 children and they also had a niece that was staying with them. So they had to find accommodations for 7 people. This was pretty difficult for Carmen. She wasn't finding anything that was accepting of them as a larger family. She found apartments and those kinds of things. And anytime she would find something that would be enough for all 7 of them, it was way out of their price range and they weren't able to afford it. Carmen continued looking though. She was looking everywhere, just hoping that something would be open for her family, when one day she was driving down the road while she was with Philip in Connecticut to get his cancer treatments. She drove past this house that was being renovated, and in the front there was a for rent sign. She was intrigued, and so she walked into the house and started looking around. This house would be absolutely perfect for her family. There would be plenty of room for everybody. And she just started kind of looking around, but she wasn't able to go into the basement as there was some major renovations going on there. But she got in contact with the property manager, and she was surprised to find that this was actually in their price range. They were perfectly able to afford this house and continue Philip's treatments. So this was going to take a lot of pressure off of the family. Everything seemed to kind of be falling into place. Alan was able to transfer jobs in due time. He was, he would have been able to move to Connecticut with them and keep his same job. So the family did not hesitate. They jumped on this offer that they had, or this opportunity that they had, and decided to just move as fast as they could. The family was very motivated to give Philip any chance he could to survive his diagnosis. Alan and Carmen decided to move some things ahead of the family, and so when they got the keys to the property, they brought a couple of things over and started exploring a little bit deeper. Now, like I said, Carmen had not been able to go into the basement as it was being renovated pretty extensively, and so when they did go into the basement, they found some things that were pretty alarming. They found tools that were weird, and they would have been tools that would have been used in a mortuary. They also found like a cooler where they would have kept bodies, so it didn't take them long to put together that this house had been a funeral home. This really made them question whether or not they actually wanted to go through with living in this home. And thinking or looking into the story and hearing about what they had to say, if I moved into a house and it had not been disclosed to me that it had at one point been a funeral home, I really feel like this would be a huge problem for me as well. They decided to continue on with the lease and move in, but also agreed that they would not tell the children that it had at one point been a funeral home. Philip was so sick and so close to death that they had no desire for him to have any knowledge of what was going on. Carmen especially did not want Philip thinking about death or anything surrounding death, because it was just he was so sick, and she just wanted to keep, like a positive energy around the family and those kinds of things. And so she was very adamant that the kids not find out that this had at one point been a funeral home. But they did ask the property manager to remove all things that had been left in the home from the mortuary, which, why it was left there in the first place is very strange to me. You would think that would, as a property manager, that would be one of the first things that you took out, but what do I know? But they moved in. The family moved in, and it didn't take long for the kids to start exploring their surroundings and their new house. Carmen also started cleaning the house, trying to make it presentable, or just, cleaning, the way you do before you move into a house. She was cleaning the house, and she tells the story of her first experience in the house that is very strange. She says that as she was mopping the floors, the bucket and water inside the bucket turned red, like blood red. She said it turned into blood and had a smell of like decaying flesh. And so she was mopping the floors and it looked like blood, and she was worried that she was going to harm the floors. So she cleaned it up and tried explaining it away, tried giving, putting a rational explanation behind it, but you really can't. It's a very strange story. But she said that this happened to her very quickly after moving in. While she was experiencing this, Philip was exploring the house and he was looking around, and Philip could also sense that something was very wrong. He says that there was a very dark presence in the house that just made him feel very uneasy. He felt like he was being watched, like something was lurking behind the corner while he was walking around. He just felt heavy and like something was watching him. While he was exploring, he also heard somebody calling his name. He was walking around and he heard someone with a deep voice saying Philip. And this really freaked him out, as it would anyone, I'm sure. And he went to his parents and he said, "Hey, this house is evil. We have to leave right now." But his parents, this is a pretty financially exhausting thing that they're going through, not only with the cancer treatments, but moving and everything. It was very financially overwhelming for them. And so they couldn't just pack up and leave, because they needed a place to live and they needed a place that was close to the hospital. This house was minutes away from the hospital. It was really perfect for the family. Carmen and Alan decided to talk to Philip and let him know, like, hey, everything's okay. There's nothing weird going on in the house, trying to like calm his fears. And they wrote it off as like he was just so close to death that he could sense that there was death all around him, or had been at one point, that this place had been a funeral home at one point. But they really tried to help, calm his fears. And so, yeah, they just kind of let it go from there. Philip was extremely close to his younger brother, and they decided that they wanted to have their bedroom in the basement. Now, the basement was just one solid room, but there was one other room attached to that, and that's where like the cooler was and those kinds of things. And that's where, in that other spare room, is where they had found the mortuary tools. But the boys set up their room and were excited about it, and everyone went about their way. Now, while Alan was able to get transferred to Connecticut for his work, it was going to take a couple of more weeks to make that transfer final. So he would have to spend his time split between New York and Connecticut. So during the weeks, he would go to New York, work, and then he would come back on the weekends and spend time with his family. So this left Carmen and the kids home alone more often than not. And it really didn't take long for things to start getting more weird. I know Carmen had that first initial experience where her water turned into blood and smelled like decay and those kinds of things. But the kids started seeing weird things too. The girls would often talk about seeing entities in their rooms, and when Carmen would go investigate, there was never anyone in there. The boys in the basement would also see people pacing back and forth in the other room, and they would hear full-blown conversations, but when they would go investigate, there was never anyone in there. This was understandably very scary to them, and so they would often take their things and go spend the night in the living room. Now, this seemed to be okay during the week, but when Alan was home on the weekends, he would try to convince them that there was nothing going on in the house and that everything was fine. He would explain things away by, like, it being a new house, you're not used to the creaks that it makes, and so that's what you're hearing. You're not hearing people pacing back and forth in the other rooms. But the kids would eventually find toe tags, the tags that funeral homes will put on a dead body to distinguish which is which. And so it didn't take them long to find out that this had in fact been a funeral home, and this scared them. Because duh, it would have scared me too. While Carmen and Alan really seemed to think that nothing paranormal was going on, Carmen was experiencing some strange things too. There were things like she would take her dishes to the table to go have the table set for dinner, and when she would turn her back, the dishes would be back in the cupboard instead of on the kitchen table. Now, this was weird for her because while she was fully convinced that she had taken the plates out of the cupboard to put onto the kitchen table, she just tried to explain it away, like maybe she just thought she had put them there and she hadn't in fact put them on the kitchen table, but inside, I think deep down she said she knew that she had put those dishes on the kitchen table. The cooler downstairs that had been used for the bodies was turned into refrigeration for the family for their the things that they needed to keep refrigerated. And oftentimes Carmen would send one of the children downstairs to grab something for her. And all of the children reported hearing somebody, an unseen entity, say Philip's name while they were down there. That's really scary, but it really seemed like this entity was targeting Philip. But Carmen and Alan talked to all of the children and tried to calm their fears, saying, hey, yes, this used to be a funeral home, but there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing, paranormal going on. There's no ghosts here. There's nothing like that. And they continued to live their lives like this. Philip continued his cancer treatments, and this was genuinely putting a massive financial strain on the family. Cancer treatments are not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, and even if you do have insurance, there's still things that you have to pay for out of pocket. Cancer treatment is very, very expensive and very difficult on any family and can cause financial strain on just about anyone. Anyone who's, just a normal person like you or I, it's very difficult for cancer treatments and people to be diagnosed with cancer because it puts such a financial strain on any family. But the family was really wanting to do anything they could to save Philip's life. They really wanted to spend more time with him. They didn't, like any family would. I don't know of any family who wouldn't want to save their child from cancer. You would do just about anything you could. I mean, I know I would absolutely be willing to go into massive debt to save one of my children's life if a cancer diagnosis were to ever happen, and I just pray that doesn't happen. But the family spent all of their savings trying to save Philip's life, and so moving just really wasn't an option for them. And these, it wasn't just financially draining on the family, it was also very mentally draining on the family. Philip especially, he really seemed to be becoming more and more exhausted as time went on. The cancer treatment really seemed to be doing a number on his mental health, and he was just really struggling. The Snedecker family was a religious family, and they would put crucifixes across the walls and, in different rooms. And one by one, these crucifixes just disappeared. They disappeared off of the walls and just were not seen again. And the paranormal activity seemed to just be getting worse. It wasn't getting any better, especially in the basement where Philip and his younger brother were staying. They continued to hear these entities talking to each other and pacing back and forth. And every time this happened, the boys would run up to their parents' room and wake them up and try to get them to see what was happening. But it never failed. Every single time that Carmen and Alan came downstairs, they couldn't ever see anything. Carmen and Alan would literally go to the extent of trying to see if there were footprints in the snow outside to see if maybe somebody was entering the house at night, but they could never find anything. So to combat what was going on in the house, the boys would keep the lights on at night in the basement. This seemed to help them sleep at night, and this seemed to kind of calm their fears and maybe keep the paranormal activity at bay, but it also caused the electricity bill to skyrocket. And this really made Alan angry because they were already facing this really difficult financial situation, and now it's hard for him to pay the electricity bill because the boys are keeping the lights on all night. So to combat this, he unscrewed all of the light bulbs in the room except for one little lamp that they were able to keep. The boys begged him not to do this. They really needed that light to help them sleep peacefully at night and keep these entities away from them, but Alan refused. He didn't believe that there was anything paranormal going on, so he took all the light bulbs and went back upstairs, and they were only given that one lamp. And this is when the paranormal activity got all the more scary. So the boys tell a story of one night they were laying in bed and all of the light bulbs have been unscrewed and taken out of the light fixtures when all of a sudden the lights start flickering on and off. They look over to the light switch and they see their little sister flipping the lights on and off. Now again, there are no lights in the light fixtures, but the lights are coming on and off and their younger sister is flipping the light switch. This is scary. So they tell her to stop and they chase her upstairs. But when they get to her room, this little girl is dead asleep in her bed. It could not have been her flickering the lights on and off. So at this point, Carmen and Alan are getting frustrated. They're kind of just over it and they're looking for anything that they can to kind of explain the situation away. So they really start looking at Philip's medication and seeing if maybe they speak to his oncologist, they talk to his doctors, and they try to come up with a reason of why he might be seeing these things. And they're really thinking that he's the one that's instigating all of this, that he's fueling the fears of the other kids and getting them convinced that there's something going on when there really isn't. So they speak to the oncologist, to Philip's oncologist, and they talk to his doctors and they say, hey, what is going on? But the oncologist is saying, no, his medications really shouldn't be causing him to hallucinate, so they start digging a little bit deeper. Eventually, Philip would be diagnosed with schizophrenia and was given a whole other host of medications to deal with this. He would also go into counseling, and the family was just hoping that he was really instigating all of these stories and what the children were seeing, but it didn't seem to help. There also seemed like there was this huge disconnect happening in the family. They were once all really, really close, and Philip especially, he was just this happy-go-lucky kid. He was just easygoing, easy to talk to, and all those things, and something was happening. He wasn't that kid anymore. And from what I read, it was after this schizophrenia diagnosis and the extra counseling he was having to take that Philip just kind of gave up and decided, gave up trying to hide from the entity and decided to face it head on. He decided to see what the entity wanted from him and try to combat it that way. And it was after this decision was made that his behavior dramatically changed. Like I said, he was really happy and carefree, really close to his parents and his families. Like he wanted to be with his brother all the time. He loved his brother very much. And it's like a flip switch. Something changed in Philip completely. Like I said in the beginning of the video, he had wanted to share a room with his younger brother, but all at once he decided he wanted his own room and wanted his brother out. He wanted his brother out of the basement. He wanted the room to himself. His parents agreed, and so his younger brother moved out of the basement, and Philip started spending all of his time in the basement. It's like he wasn't afraid of it anymore. Now that's where he wanted to be. And he started just getting really, really angry. Like his whole demeanor changed. He was angry all the time. He was writing pretty disturbing poetry and would talk so poorly about his family. He talked about how he hated his family and, you know, just evil things. He did not. It was a complete 180. He was a completely different kid, and it was just very shocking behavior from him. He got really aggressive with his little brothers and sisters, and it just was not like him. Now, while his attitude and his behavior was getting really, really bad and aggressive, it was during this time that his cancer went into remission. He was, done with the treatments and all these things, and he got better, and he was done with his cancer treatments. But even getting the news that Philip's cancer was in remission didn't seem to cheer him up. Didn't seem like he cared about it at all. In fact, things just got worse. He got even more aggressive, and he started talking about violence towards his family, and it was just alarming. It got so bad that he attempted to essay his cousin that was living with him. It was after this that his family had him arrested. They had him arrested for this offense, and after everything was said and done, they decided that he was going to go live with other family members outside of the house. Now, when Philip was removed from the household, he told his parents to be careful because now that he wasn't there anymore, the entity would come for the rest of them. The strange thing is that as soon as Philip was removed from the house and taken to live with his other family members, his attitude changed completely. He went back to his carefree, happy-go-lucky self. He no longer had the diagnosis of schizophrenia. He didn't hear the voices anymore. He didn't need the medications for all these other things. Like, he completely went back to normal. But just as he had warned, after he left, the entity became more aggressive towards the rest of the family. It started targeting the niece that was staying with them. Crucifixes and crosses kept going missing throughout the house. And there was one really terrifying incident where Alan went to work and his car that was being driven by nobody crashed into his workplace. And Philip at this point was starting to believe that something evil was in the house, and he believes that there was an entity that followed him to work and attacked him that way. Carmen was also completely convinced that something paranormal was going on, and so one day she decided to go downstairs into Philip's bedroom and just wait to see if she could see anything. She even called out to the entity and said, "Hey, show yourself, do something," and she saw nothing. But she did realize that that part of the house was much colder than the rest of the house. But no matter how hard she tried to entice the entity in the basement, nothing ever appeared. But that didn't stop it from attacking her later on when she was in the shower. She talks about being in the shower and being attacked by something unseen outside. It tried suffocating her with the shower curtain from the outside, and she says that this was just a very scary experience where her niece had to come pull her out after she was yelling for help. Blankets would be pulled off of them while they were sleeping, and on multiple times, both Alan and Carmen say that they were essayed by this entity that was in this house. Very, very scary things were happening to this family while they were still in this house. And one of the other very terrifying things that I think was happening was the younger children would hear Philip's voice from the basement calling out to them, trying to entice them to come downstairs. But Philip was still living, with another family member outside of the home. Philip wasn't even at home when these kids were hearing his voice from the basement. So who knows what this entity was trying to do by luring them down into the basement. So at this point, Carmen and Philip fully believe everything that the children had said, and they had had enough. They wanted nothing more to do with this entity. So they decided to call different priests in their area to see if they could come bless the house or try to come up with a solution for this entity in the house. Multiple priests came, and one specifically told them to just ignore the activity that was going on, and then it would eventually leave. But it's kind of hard to ignore all of the things that are happening to this family, and I can only imagine how defeated they felt when, this priest is telling them, "Oh, just ignore it, it'll go away." So Carmen started looking even more into it, and that's when she found Ed and Lorraine Warren. Carmen reached out to Ed and Lorraine asking them for help. She, wanted them to come into the house and investigate and see what was going on. And so they did. Ed and Lorraine came to the house and they, stayed for multiple days. They also came with another investigator named John Zaffis, and they stayed for multiple days and they investigated the home and they declared that it was in fact haunted. They experienced the majority of the things that the family said that they experienced. Ed and Lorraine investigated the home and they found several very scary things. Lorraine was a medium and she felt that the darkest presence was in the basement where Philip had been staying. They also found that one of the undertakers who had worked at the funeral home had also been convicted of necrophilia. I'm not going to go into it, but either way, the evil that had happened in the house had left a evil presence there, and this is what the family was experiencing, and Ed and Lorraine decided that the entire house needed an exorcism. So they did just that. They performed the exorcism, and after that, the house was declared free of any paranormal activity, and that was kind of that, or so you would think. The most interesting part of this story is that many people believe that this story is completely fabricated. There's a couple of pieces of evidence that kind of point to this. Ray Garton, and I may have said his name wrong, I'm sorry if I did, and correct me in the comments. He was writing a book called In a Dark Place, and while he was talking to the Snedecker family, he had some, he was kind of worried about a couple of things. He came to Ed and he said, hey, listen, their story's not adding up. I guess the story that this family was telling wasn't exactly like, it was kind of contradicting, like the family members would contradict each other and their stories weren't lining up into a cohesive story, and so he was really starting to question whether or not this was all true. According to him, Ed Warren told him, just write the story and make it as scary as possible because this family is crazy. According to Ray, Ed said that everyone who came to him was crazy because sane people wouldn't come to them. Ed would later combat this in an interview, saying that he had never said that and that what had happened to the Snedecker family was very true. He said that both he and Lorraine had experienced most of the things that had happened to the family and that this all was completely true and nobody had made anything up. But that's not to say that Ed and Lorraine aren't part of their own controversy. Since both of them have passed, many people have really kind of wondered about whether or not their stories are true or there's any truth in what they're talking about, or if they're just kind of like snake oil sellers. So I don't know. I think that's a whole nother conversation to be had if Ed and Lorraine really do, or if their stories were really true. But we all know a lot of the stories that Ed and Lorraine claim to have been a part of, like The Conjuring and Annabelle and those kinds of stories. So there's also the evidence that the people who have lived in the house before and after the Snedecker family say that there might have been some eerie things, like, you know, a couple of things moving on their own, but nothing to the extent of what the Snedecker family says. There is currently a family living in the Haunting in Connecticut house. I think what they said is that their biggest problem is with people coming to the house and being disrespectful while they're there, kind of encroaching on their privacy and those kinds of things, but that they've never experienced anything paranormal in the house. So let me just say that if you are planning on going to see the house, just please be respectful. Somebody does live there and this is their private property. Don't, go onto their property. Don't be rude to people who live there. They want to live in peace. Thank you. But I think that's something to take into consideration. The people that lived there before and after have said that there was no paranormal activity to the extent that the Snedecker family did. So I guess this is really all up to your own interpretation. Do you think that what happened to the Snedecker family is true? Do you think that there's any truth in it? Do you think that maybe they embellished it a little bit? Do you think that maybe they were so financially down and out that they decided to spin this story to make a quick buck? I don't know. I think that that's pretty hard to make up. I do think that there is some truth to it. I don't know. Maybe there was some embellishments. Maybe there wasn't. I'm not sure. But Philip is completely cured of cancer. He's still alive today, and he's a truck driver and has his own family. But yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on this. Do you think that the Snedecker family is telling the truth? Do you think that it's all just a hoax to make a quick buck? What are your thoughts behind this? Do you believe in the paranormal? Do you believe in ghosts? I would love to know your comments and what you think is going on at the Haunting in Connecticut house. But that's pretty much all I have for you today. I hope this finds you so well, and I'm sending so much love to each and every one of you, and I will hopefully see you next week. Bye.